In a day and age of inflation and random tariffs, it's kind of nice when something actually gets cheaper for a change, and better at the same time. And that's exactly what's going on here with Hiby's new 2025 update to the R6 Gen 3. Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan, this is Super Review, and for the past couple of weeks I've been living with this player and really just trying to figure out what is different about the 2025 update to the R6 Gen 3. And apart from the price, which I guess I've already mentioned, this thing got cheaper, and just to put that into context, the outgoing R6 Gen 3 came in at $500 US, kind of a average price for a mid-tier digital audio player. But here with the 2025 update, that's down to $440 US, at least for now. We'll see how long that lasts. So what did I find? What is actually different? Well, we're going to talk about that. So just as kind of like a heads up of what we're going to talk about, we're going to start with what you get inside the box, physical form factor, build quality, feedback, and stuff like that. Then we'll talk about the functionality, the default software experience, which you can do with this, because this is an Android audio player. Then we'll also talk about my experience with battery life and my feedback on the sound, which I know I don't talk a lot about sound, but that is actually where this player has improved over the outgoing model. And then, of course, we'll bring in a couple of comparisons, just some competitors, some alternatives that you might want to consider versus the R6 Gen 3 before we wrap up this review with a score. So with that said, let us dive to the table and show you the box. This is the box. It's a nice, simple box. I like it. And here's what you get inside the box, which is, you know, pretty typical for an audio player of this price. The one thing, I guess I'll start with this. It comes with a screen protector. This is kind of like a cheap plastic screen protector, which frankly, I'm not a big fan of these, but I guess it's nice that they include it. And this is actually a spare because the device actually comes with two of these things pre-installed, one on the front, one on the back. Again, I'm not a big fan of the plastic screen protectors because they just don't feel very nice. Like they get in they interfere with the smoothness of my scroll. But if you're a big fan of that kind of stuff, it is nice, I guess, that they include an extra, although maybe tempered glass next time. Maybe one day we'll get there. Apart from that, of course, you get a USB-C cable, which you can use for charging or ostensibly for data transfer. Although if you use a Mac, just as a fair warning, if you haven't used an Android device before, accessing the external memory on an Android device through a Mac is kind of a pain in the butt. It never really works for me. But on Windows you can. And it's got USB-C to C on both ends, which is interesting. Apart from that, you also get a little carry case, and you can see that it comes in this smoked gray color. I actually kind of like this. It does, like a lot of these, where can I put this on screen? Let me move that to the side. Like a lot of these cases, it will cover up the buttons, which I don't prefer. But I do generally find that it keeps them pretty accessible and still nice and hand feelable, which for me is an important part of an audio player. Like the main reason I like using an audio player versus using my phone is access to physical buttons. And if you've got a case that makes those buttons less accessible, well, it's kind of a bummer. In this case, I would say that they are fine, but it certainly would still be preferable for me if it didn't cover up the buttons. You can see that with the volume dial up here, they've actually left it completely clear, which is, I mean, they would have to, but that would be nice to do with the buttons as well. Okay, let me put that to the side and let me talk about this audio player. We're gonna dive into the details of this thing. Let me just pull up my notes, make sure I don't miss anything. If you are familiar with the outgoing R6, and I'll just show it here on screen for you, I've got it here in hand. This is virtually identical in terms of form factor versus the R6. You might notice that this one is silver, this one's black. You can get the new one in black. You could have gotten this one in silver if you wanted as well. So really not any significant differences on the exterior apart from this kind of interesting styling choice. So the back panel has, I don't even know what I want to call this, like this almost semi-holographic design. So that's kind of like the only thing that's different. And to be honest, I'm okay with that because the build quality and the form factor on the outgoing model is perfectly fine. The screen is they say a 5-inch 720p screen. So not the highest of resolutions, but here, I'll punch in on it so you can take a look. I don't think anyone's going to have issues with the resolution on the screen. It is nice and crisp and clear. The one thing that you might have some issues with is just generally the contrast ratio, which might not totally come across here. Let me see if I can pull up let me pull up the same album. I should have prepared for this. But this is basically another audio player that has, I think, a much nicer screen. Now the price on this is about $100 more, so that maybe contributes to it. But let me pull up basically the same screen and you can see just how much nicer it looks over here on the iBasso. just a lot contrastier at the same brightness levels. So that is a little bit of a deterrent, or a downside here. I would say also the viewing angles on it are not fantastic. It's not awful, but there's definitely nicer looking screens out there. This is, again, kind of a mid-tier priced DAP, so set your expectations accordingly. But generally, I honestly just don't have any complaints with the screen on this guy. Okay, what else? Let's talk about the buttons and kind of like the interface. I mentioned the buttons are the big reason I like a digital audio player, and I generally think that Hiby does some of the best button layouts. Maybe it's just because I mostly use Hibys when I'm not doing reviews that this is what I'm used to, but I like this button layout. So up top, you've got your power on-off button, right? So it's nice, easy, accessible, and very findable, and it's a different size and shape than these other buttons, so it's easy to find and know that this is the button I'm hitting. Down below, you've got your play pause, you've got previous track, and you've got next track. And while it is true that all of these buttons are the same shape and could be maybe confused for one or the other, they're close enough together that when I put my finger down, I can tell that I'm between buttons up here. And for me, that's enough for me to know that this is the play button and that's the previous track button. So really, I find the blind use of this audio player to be really quite nice. Yeah, it's all, within hand's reach, all on the same side, and I like that. The one thing that's not all on the same side is going to be the volume control, and that's because they have opted to have a volume dial over here on the top of the device. I am kind of mixed opinion still about whether or not a knob is the ideal solution for a portable audio player. Generally with audio, I think knobs are fantastic, okay? I understand the appeal of a knob, but when it comes to a portable player, there's some trade-offs, including, when you pocket an audio player that has a knob, when you put it in your pocket, there's a chance that you're gonna bump the knob and accidentally change your volume. Now, they do a couple of things to, I think, make that not such a big issue, all right? So thing number one that they do is they just kind of surround it with a lot of the aluminum frame. So to change it, you have to be fairly deliberate. There's not like a big touch surface to adjust the volume. But the other thing that they do, and I think this is intentional, I actually don't know for fact, but the knob seems to be less sensitive when I have the screen turned off, okay? Can I demonstrate this? I don't know. So let's see, I'll just do one. No, the volume's not adjusting here. Let me plug something into it so we can demonstrate this. I hadn't planned to do this, but I think this makes sense. All right. Can we see this? So let me go to volume level of 50. I'm going to do just kind of one pass from over here. And I went up 2 notches, all right? So if I go back 2 notches. I'm going to turn the screen off and do that same pass. Turn the screen back on. And where's our volume at? We're still at 50. It didn't change. Basically, yeah, it just takes a lot of turns of the dial when the screen is turned off in order to make volume adjustments. I suppose that they're doing that to make it less sensitive to prevent sort of those pocket issues, but it does kind of play into another downside of having a knob, is just that ramping up the volume when you're using a knob means a lot of turning and cranking, whereas when you have button-based power, you can just press and hold the button and the volume will kind of ramp itself up. So, there's trade-offs there. I think knob people know they're knob people, and people who don't care about knobs are probably similar to me. They're a little ambivalent. Not that I don't care about the knob. I've used enough players with them to know that it's a trade-off rather than a necessity. But there you go. Okay, let's talk about the rest of this because we're still not done talking about this thing. I haven't even really mentioned that the build quality and the form factor on this is just fantastic. It feels really nice in the hand. You do have a completely aluminum rail all the way around, top to bottom, all left and right and sides, which is nice. You've got the glass front, of course. You've got also a glass back, which feels nice in the hand for sure, but it does make the device a little bit heavier than probably it needs to be. And it also means that when you put this on a soft, your couch or something like that, it might have the tendency to fall off and slide off. Now, it's not super polished. It doesn't seem like it has an oleophobic coating on it that makes it super slick or anything, so I haven't really had problems with that. But generally, I do prefer audio players to have more of a matte soft touch on the back. But if you're going for the premium feel, you get glass, and that's what they've gone with. Okay, let's talk about the ports in this thing. So, well, just to highlight over here, on the left side, you've got your micro SD card slot, which is something that you need on these things. And then down here, you've got all of your inputs and outputs. And let's see, what do I want to talk about? So first of all, you do have standard 3.5 mil output, so you can use a single-ended connector. You've also got a balanced 4.4 mil connector over here, and then of course your USB-C for charging. And then over here on the left, it seems like you've got the ports repeated, but basically these are line out ports. So these are made to go out to a stereo output or something like that. I haven't actually tested them. I suspect usually with this kind of thing, they have higher output impedance. To be honest, it's a little, not that necessary, but it looks cool, I suppose. One thing that's kind of nice is that they do all four of these have their own independent volume memory. So if you use one headphone on the single ended and you've got the volume set to, like, let's say 30%, and then maybe on your line out going into your home stereo, you want that cranked to 100% volume, you're not gonna accidentally blow your ears off when you plug your headphones back in, because the headphone jack is gonna remember that it was only at 30% volume, and this one's gonna remember that it was at 100% volume. And I think that's a nice little touch. But other than that, anything else on the physical form factor to talk about? I don't think so. I do want to briefly mention this. So this is Hiby's new Yacht 10 IM. This is a single dynamic driver IM that they are pricing at around 130 bucks. But the reason I bring it up is that you can also buy it in a package with the R6 Gen 3. And if you buy them as a package, they knock like 10 bucks off the price, right? So this becomes $120 additional. I'm not going to do a full review here on the Yacht 10, but I will give you just kind of my quick feedback is that at 130 bucks, 120 bucks, it's not bad. It's not a bad IM, but it's certainly not standout. Just kind of a generic V-shaped sound signature. It's got a decent bass boost to it with some nice physicality behind it, but I do find the treble to be a little bit on the edge of being sibilant and splashy. Yeah, just overall, like, I feel like you can do better in terms of sound, but if you do really like the way that this thing looks, it's certainly not a bad IM. Just if you're looking for $120 to add to your R6 purchase, it's going to make it sound the best. I would actually recommend Awful's Explorer, but that is neither here nor there. So let us get into talking about more of the functionality of this audio player. We're going to start by just talking about the specs that this thing comes with, okay? There's not, I'll just warn you, not a lot changed versus the outgoing R6 Gen 3. So in terms of Android version, this thing has got Android 12 on it, which is certainly not the newest version of Android. As far as I can tell, I think that one came out in 2021, so it's a few years out of date, but still a perfectly modern version of Android. It's going to be familiar if you're used to modern versions of Android, and more importantly, it's going to run probably all the software that you want. There's no apps that I was looking for that were not available to download in the Google Play Store, which I guess on that note, this thing does also have the Google Play Store. In terms of specs, it's running the same Snapdragon 665 that a lot of these audio players have been running for a couple of years now at this point. It's getting a little bit long in the tooth. I'll show you kind of Spotify performance in a little bit. But still, like, this is a good enough processor for me that I'm happy to use streaming services. Although primarily I use PowerAmp, which is a non-streaming service. And for this, performance is fantastic. With Spotify, it does start to chug a little bit. And again, I'll demonstrate that in a little bit. Well, actually, let's just do that right now. Let's see. All right, here, let's do Spotify and just kind of show you. I've got nothing else running in the background, including Spotify. Give you an idea of how long it takes to launch Spotify. So not super quick, but not super bad. And then just kind of like the general scroll performance. You might see that there's a little bit of chunking, although if I'm scrolling at kind of a reasonable pace like this, generally pretty good. Mostly you're going to see the chunking when I do like a long, big, fast scroll like that. But I don't know, for the most part, I find the Spotify performance on this thing to be, I would say, adequate. It's certainly not going to impress you, blow your face off, but frankly, most of these digital audio players won't. Okay, and then I guess I'll also mention this thing has 64 gigabytes of ROM storage, so if you want to put your own music on it, there is 64 gigabytes of space, although a big chunk of that's going to be taken up by the operating system and stuff. So really, I would expect to bring your own memory card. And then it does have 4 gigabytes of RAM, which is a little bit more than some audio players that use this same processor, but frankly, it was not enough for me to notice any significant difference in terms of performance. Now, elaborating on that Android experience, like this is basically a stock Android experience, which is for me ideal. I don't like having a lot of customizations on these players. Some players will have like super modified versions of Android that are frankly just more irritating and annoying, whereas Hiby does a pretty good job of just giving you stock Android, and I like that. On top of that, like I just don't run into any limitations or restrictions in terms of what I want to do. So you might notice I'm running Niagara launcher here, so I can customize my launcher, use whatever I want. I'm also running battery overlay bar or overlay battery bar, so I can see my battery life, even if I'm in an app that goes full screen like this. I've got Drive Sync on this thing, so it's syncing my music library. Of course, I can run Spotify, I can run Hiby, I can run Power Amp. This basically just does everything that I need it to, and that's fantastic. It just doesn't limit me in any way, in ways that some other players will be a little bit sneaky about. I don't think they do it intentionally. Well, I'll have to ask them one day. Why do they do that stuff? Okay, like I mentioned, there is the Google Play Store. I'll just kind of highlight it here for you. You can launch into the Google Play Store, install whatever apps you want. But if you are using the stock music app, I'll just give you a quick tour and some feedback that are kind of the same things I always say about this music app, is that Hiby's stock music app is one of the better ones, but still not fantastic. It still makes a couple of issues, or it still has a couple of issues that keep me from using it full time. For starters, right? Let's do the cure test, right? The cure does not appear here in the C's because it's alphabetized instead down with the T's. Basically, I don't like a player software that puts all of the thes together, because I want the cure to be alphabetized with the C's. Another thing that this player does, or this software does, unfortunately, is it won't let me listen to all of the Cure's albums on repeat, which is something I do a lot. I know maybe I'm the only person in the world that does this, so maybe I'm the only one that's asking for this. But if I want to listen to this album and then this album and then that album and have them loop, I can't do that. I mean, maybe I can make a playlist and do that, but I can't just do it here on the player. I have to either listen to one album on repeat, or you can unfurl all the songs and list them out in alphabetical order. Although actually it looks like it's doing it in track order now. Now this is in track order, but it's mixing up all of the albums. So I'm listening to like track 1 from one album, then track 2 from the next. Like it's wild. I don't know why it does that. So that's not super useful. Apart from that, do I have other complaints about it? Okay, just briefly, I'll show you that, it loads the album arts fairly quickly. So that's nice, but it doesn't keep them in memory quite as long. Actually, this is doing a pretty decent job. So I'll give that a pass. But generally, I'm still going to prefer Power Amp, because Power Amp doesn't have those problems that I just highlighted. I'll go up to highlight the Cure. They're on the C's. If I want to listen to all albums in order, I just tap that button, and I've got all of the albums in order. That's what I want. Okay, anything else to talk about this stock music app? I don't think so. No. Oh, actually, maybe just a quick note. If you are using a player like this, and this is not unique to Hiby, a lot of players do this. By default, when you scan music, there are these options, right? Go into these options, and by default, it's going to be ignoring tracks that are under 500 KB and ignoring tracks that are shorter than 60 seconds. So if you have albums that have like, a 60-second interlude or something in it, and you don't want that to be ignored by the player, you're gonna have to go into the settings and disable that. I don't know why it's on by default. Again, Hiby is not the only one that does this. Maybe in other markets, like this is just a common thing, is like people have these short audio tracks that they don't want included in their music library. But personally, I like listening to albums. I want everything that's on my albums. I don't have tracks that you're scanning that I don't want in there. So just include them all, and you can make it work. But anyway, all right. Other stuff to talk about the software. Kind of like the stock software experience. A thing that Hiby is doing uniquely well amongst digital audio players is their audio filtering that they do system-wide. So just to kind of show you, if you go into the settings, punch in on this, go into audio settings, they've got like your normal, aliasing filters for the DACs. I don't touch that stuff at all. I don't really care about that stuff because I can't hear it. But they have also a couple of options, including plugins, MSEB, and PEQ. So I'll just drill in on the PEQ real quick. If you're familiar with using parametric equalizer, you can basically use this to customize your sound any way you want. Like, you have a lot of flexibility here with a full parametric EQ. A lot of people are more familiar with like a 10-band EQ. And I was just like looking, do they actually even have a 10-band EQ? They might not even have that, which is interesting. But parametric EQ is just so much more flexible. You can do a lot, especially if you combine it with a tool like SquigLink, where you can basically use SquigLink to build an EQ profile, export it, and then come in here to Hiby. Oh, it's off screen. Import it, and then you can import that text file into the Hiby app, and then you can have your custom PEQ being applied system-wide. So it doesn't just apply to using the stock music app, it applies also if you're using Spotify or if you're using Power Amp or whatever. And I think that's freaking awesome. It's actually fantastic. Now, I do think that there's still actually some ways that they can improve this experience. Some, useful quality of life things. Like, it would be nice if some of the PEQ settings and stuff were integrated into these quick settings on Android, so you could toggle on and off the PEQ, or maybe like switch between different profiles with a quick tap. Like, that would be really nice. As a person who personally, I use a lot of different headphones, that kind of stuff would be really nice. But alas, we gotta be happy about what we got, and this is frankly better than, again, pretty much anybody else is doing. But that's not the only stuff they've got, because they've also got this MSEB EQ mode. This is like EQ. This is going to sound rude. But it's basically like EQ for dummies. Like, if you're not familiar with using EQ and you don't, it's kind of scary and like you're worried about ruining the music, this is just kind of like a nice simplified way to go in and adjust the sound signature according to kind of like common audiophile terms, like make it warmer or brighter or cooler, make the sound deeper or lighter. I'm not sure exactly what that means. Fast and thumpy. Again, these are just like kind of more friendly, easier words to understand. And you can come in here. I've got it disabled now. Hold on. Okay. And you just adjust it and instantly hear the effects of these changes. And again, it's going to be system-wide, which is really cool. But that's not the only thing. The other thing I want to highlight here briefly is the plugins. I need to do a video about the plugins, because this is a feature that I ignored for a long time on Hiby audio players. But it lets you do convolution filters and change with this DRX 10K dynamics filter. Meant nothing to me. These will make very audible changes though, unlike those DAC filters and stuff I alluded to earlier. And it is possible to get some actually really cool effects on this if you know what you're doing. And I don't even know if I can really confidently say that I know what I'm doing, but I got some help from Hiby, thanks Joe Blogs. And maybe I should do a video just kind of showing you how you can apply his kind of recipe for audio on these little players, and really makes these things a lot of fun to dink around with. I will be honest. Maybe not an everyday thing, but every once in a while, they're fun to play with. Okay, so that's the system-wide EQ. Again, pretty excited about that stuff. But now let's talk about the battery life here on the R6 Gen 3 2025 edition, which is unfortunately where there are some downsides versus the outgoing model. Now, the battery is not smaller. It's the same 4,500 milliamp hour battery, which should be plenty big for a device like this. But the claimed battery life on single-ended, right, just 3.5, is 13 hours. And if you switch over to balance connector, that drops down to 11 hours of expected battery life. And then if you switch over into, I'm going to talk about this because I don't really care, but you can actually enable a Class A mode amplifier. If you do that on this audio player, you're going to be dropping the battery life down another couple of hours. So the battery life on this thing is it's not fantastic. On the outgoing model, it was a couple of hours better. Still not fantastic, but it was a little bit better, and it is a bit of a bummer to see the battery life go down. And it's not just in terms of their spec sheet. I did actually do a comparison where I had this player and the outgoing model running side by side, just sitting on my desk for a day. And at the end of the day, this was down to, I believe, 54%, and then the old R6 Gen 3 was down to like 65%. So you do get better battery life on the old player versus this one, and that's just a little bit of a bummer. I guess another note too is that this thing will get a little bit warm in operation. During normal operation, it's not going to be significant. You might feel it in your hand that it's getting a little bit warm. But if you are like me and you sleep with a digital audio player, you've got it under your bed sheets, this will actually get pretty toasty. I would say uncomfortably warm for me, which is a little bit of a bummer. But then I guess the plus side of the battery stuff is that while it is, a 4,500 milliamp hour battery, not super small, it does seem to charge it pretty quickly. So it does a good job of that. And I didn't have any issues with compatibility on my different chargers. And I do have a lot of different chargers. Okay, let's move into now talking about the sound here on the R6 Gen 3. And this is where I've alluded to up front. This is where there's actually some pretty significant differences. And I think this is probably where the difference in the battery life is coming from. Because again, it's got the same processor as the old unit, same battery as the old unit, but the battery life is actually a little bit worse. And why is that? Well, it's because they've got different audio architecture. And in the old model, they had, I believe, 2 ESS DACs. This new model has got 4 Cirrus Logic DACs. What do they call it? It's the CS43198, if that means anything to you. I don't really pay attention too much to these DAC models because they all basically sound the same to me. Although I just said it sounds different, so we'll get there. In terms of power output, I would say it's pretty modest on this device. On the single-ended connection, which is mostly what I use, it's just 125 milliwatts of output power, which is actually plenty to run things like my Sennheiser HD600, so I really shouldn't complain about it, but you would think that something like this would have higher power output versus their lower expensive devices, and frankly, it's 125 milliwatts at 32 ohms, which is pretty basic. Again, it's plenty for me for driving all of my headphones and all of my IEMs for the most part, but if I do happen to go into, here's where it becomes a concern for me, is I go to audio shows. And when I'm listening to audio shows, I like to bring my own player, provide my own music, and I need them to get a little bit louder than I normally listen to stuff. And when you're interacting with a bunch of different headphones that have various power requirements and you're in a loud environment, 125 milliwatts of power is really just like, it's kind of bare minimum, and I would like to see that number go up. Now, if you use this on a balance connector, it does go up to 405 milliwatts of output power. And I think that should be fine for most people. Again, it's not super high, it's not super impressive, but I think around 400, 500 milliwatts of output power is about as much as I need out of these little players. There is going to be some trade-off in terms of the maximum output power versus how much battery life you're getting. And again, this battery life is already a little bit compromised, but I don't think that's like I don't think it's like 1-to-1. I think there probably is a way to get nice power output out of these players and still give us 20 hours of battery life. One day we'll get there, but there you go. Okay. Anything else to talk about the sound? Of course. Yeah, I didn't even talk about the only thing that's actually different, which is not the sound stage, not the warmth and the character of the sound, but the noise performance on this is actually significantly improved versus the R6 Gen 3, the outgoing model. And this is like one of the only differences I can usually hear between different audio players or different DACs and amps is like how much noise is there when you're using a sensitive IEM. For me, my test case is my Campfire Audio Aura. It is super sensitive, probably to a fault, but if there is hiss coming out of an audio player, that headphone is going to pick it up. And on this, I really don't pick up any audible hiss. Maybe the faintest hint of a hiss I can hear on the balance connection, but really the noise floor performance on this thing is fantastic. It is as good as I would ever want out of an audio player. I did pick up maybe a little bit of interferences and noise when I was using Wi-Fi. Again, this is like kind of a stress test. This is not a normal scenario, but if I'm listening to a track that is just playing silence, I'm listening on the balance connector, which usually has more noise, and I'm using the Campfire Aura, which is super sensitive, and I've got it a little bit louder than I normally listen. If I'm, run a download test, a speed test in the browser here on this device, I can hear some noise kind of coming into the audio chain, and it is a little bit of a bummer to hear that sort of thing, but it's also frankly fairly common. I don't think most of the times you're going to encounter this, but if you are listening to a sensitive IEM on the balance connection, and even just like scrolling Spotify, you might hear it a little bit coming into play. But if you're using a full-size headphone that, is 32 ohms or plus, you're probably not going to be hearing it. So just to kind of put that into context. But yeah, generally very impressed with the noise floor performance on this device. But I don't know, that's pretty much all I got to say about this audio player, apart from putting into context against a couple of other alternatives out there. So over here we've got Hiby's own R5 or R4 actually. Sorry, this is their lower end model. That is 250 US dollars using the same Snapdragon processor. It's got the same battery, maybe slightly worse battery life, but about the same battery life. And it's just, you know, 200 bucks cheaper. So what's different versus that? We'll talk about it. And then over here, I've got iBasso's DX180. This would have been a better competitor versus this before the 2025 update because the price on this is 540 bucks. And now with the lower price on this one, this comparison gets a little bit harder to make, but still bringing in kind of a couple of alternatives on different sides of the price range so you can make up your own mind about what matters to you. Okay, so versus the R4 over here. Why I bring this one in versus the M300, I actually prefer the M300 overall, but if you're looking for that system-wide PEQ and filtering options that you get here on the R6, you also do get that here on the R4, which is quite nice. There we go. Let me put something on the screen. I need something colorful. Do I have anything colorful? I don't think I have anything colorful. So you have to stick with whatever that is. Okay. Sorry, where was I going? So it's got all the system-wide filters and EQ and stuff like that, which is fantastic. I do believe this has higher levels of noise floor, whereas I mentioned that's like the standout feature here in the sound of the R6 is the noise floor performance is fantastic. Over here on the R4, you are going to get more noise floor, especially in the balance connection. That's just kind of a trade-off, I guess, of the lower end devices and components over here. And then otherwise, like most of the difference, honestly, just kind of comes down to premium build materials. This feels nicer in the hand. It's got glass both front and back. You can see the screen has got smaller bezels where this R4 has got this giant bezel down here. It's got this weird protrusion up top. The screen is just overall a little bit worse quality. It's dimmer over here on the R4, which is why I'm tilting it up for you to see. This is just nicer components, a little bit nicer sound, but otherwise a lot in common in terms of performance and what to expect out of them. So is that worth 200 bucks for you? I'll let you make up your own mind on that. Personally, I do kind of like the way that this one feels in my hand, so I would kind of be tempted to move up to it. But now versus iBasso's DX180, again, 540 bucks, about $100 more than the Hiby. Downsides on this one, you don't have system-wide EQ. There's none of that stuff, which you do get over here on the Hiby. So if that stuff is important to you, and I think that is, again, a killer feature of Hiby stuff, it's a bit of a bummer that iBasso doesn't have anything to compete with that. Also has no noise floor. The noise floor performance on the DX180 is pretty fantastic. And then I guess I'll also just briefly complain about this thing being kind of sharp actually on the edges to hold in the hand. Like it's just a little bit uncomfortable. And it does also come with a silicone case in the packaging, but I found that the buttons on this thing are a little bit too sensitive. And when I had that silicone case, I was just accidentally pressing them all the time. So for me, I'm using this thing caseless, but dang, it is sharp. Like it just legitimately scratched my hand. So that's a little bit of a trade-off here, but otherwise there's some stuff that's actually nicer. Like the build materials on this thing are fantastic. I was highlighting earlier, the screen is just gorgeous. This is actually not coming across totally here on camera, but yeah, you can kind of tell. This thing has just got much nicer contrast levels. The colors just look a lot crisper. This is just a beautiful screen over here on the iBasso. Not usually a big priority for me when it comes to my audio players, if I'm honest, but when I pulled it out and was comparing it, I was like, wow, that is a big difference in terms of the quality of that screen. Power output is also a lot better here on the iBasso. On single-ended, you're getting 280 milliwatts of power versus, again, the 125 milliwatts over here. And then on balanced, you're getting a little under 700 milliwatts of output versus, again, the 405 milliwatts of output power you get over here. So quite a bit better power output levels. And this was evident when I was listening to my Sennheiser HD600s, and even more so with the Moondrop Cosmo, which I was also doing some testing with. Battery life is not really any better on this device versus the Hiby, unfortunately, so pretty similar in terms of battery performance, but the one plus side of this device is that it has screws on the back. So you can actually open up the back of the iBasso and replace the battery, which is kind of cool. I mean, you could ostensibly replace the battery on here, but you're going to need a heat gun at minimum to get the back off of it, and then probably you're going to need to desolder it, whereas the iBasso makes that a lot easier, and that is kind of nice. And then I guess the last bit I'll mention is that this knob over here, it is exposed, so like some of those problems I mentioned about the pocketability of a knob are even worse over here on the iBasso. but it does overall feel much nicer, and it is easier to ramp the volume up and down. So I don't know. I think if I'm going for a knob, if I'm looking for the best knob, the iBasso does have that. But is that worth $100 extra? Again, I'll leave that to you to decide as I wrap up this review. So let me just check my notes, make sure I haven't missed anything. And I haven't. So in conclusion, the Hiby R6 Gen 3 2025 update. What's different? Mostly it sounds a little bit better. The battery life is a little bit worse, and the price is quite a bit better. Overall, out of 5 stars, it's a 4-star. It's a 4-star digital audio player. Again, it's kind of sandwiched in between a couple of other competitively priced things that are also, in my mind, like 4-star digital audio players. They've all got different sets of trade-offs. If you want something that's got a nice premium build with system-wide PEQ and just a really nice software experience, the R6 is quite nice of an option. The biggest downsides for this for me really are just the battery life. If the battery life was better on this thing, I would be frankly super excited and stoked about it. But because the battery life is pretty mediocre, it's still a good player. And it's like these all have frankly kind of mediocre battery lives. So I'm still going to keep complaining it, but yeah, overall, I do think that this is a very nice player, a nice update, especially with that price drop. And if you want to check it out, of course, I've got it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't already, and why not, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, join me on Discord, also linked down below, and I'll catch you on the next super review. Cheers.
Joined with the force of reviews, we now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit. Let's get into the future.